Hey everybody, it's Corey from Thought Soldiers. So today I had a request from quite a few people to discuss clearing, and I figured why not talk about it now underneath a full moon and lunar eclipse tonight on, what is the date today? July 16th, 2019. So I'm thinking about turning this into a three-part series to discuss clearing at all levels. So emotional clearing, physical clearing, and energetic clearing when it comes down to it, and this is my belief system. So if it resonates, hang on to it. If it doesn't, throw it out. It's all just energy manifesting in different forms within our lives. And the call of when this comes up is a focal point on something that we need to clear within us, whether it be a belief, whether it be a certain frequency, someone else's energy, whether it be an emotional response, trauma, so on and so forth. It all ties down to an energetic imprint that is held within our body that is either manifested spiritually, physically, or emotionally. So, the first part that I'm going to talk about this is emotional clearing, which emotional clearing for me seems to be the easiest, yet it is so difficult for us as human beings to be able to use properly, which is basically just feeling the emotion. So, when it comes down to it, with the programming of societal programming, and dependent on the way you're raised, things like that, and especially being a man, it is very difficult for us to learn how to use our emotions for good by letting them out, the good, the bad, and the ugly. A lot of us have a tough time properly processing emotions, and so we just end up stuffing and compartmentalizing, or putting so far down within the depths of our being that all these other layers get stacked on top of it, and then before you know it, you've got this full cup full of crap, and all it takes is one drop and everything comes spilling over, especially when it comes down to anger, depression, and other what I would call unfavorable emotions. So emotional clearing for me a lot is just, if something pops up, I feel it, without bypassing it. And it's really hard, especially when you want to be strong and you don't want to show weakness in front of another individual. But what I've had to learn to do is to transmute that whole idea, alchemize it, and go, no, me processing my emotions and letting them out is actually a strength. And I really had to learn to flip that programming, especially since early on I felt a lot of emotions as a kid, and I let them out. And every time I did, there was some sort of like, getting made fun of or whatever. I was just taught it's not okay to feel. Hence why I turned to drugs. And when I didn't know how to properly feel things, I went to a doctor and they started to prescribe me medications in order to numb. So when it comes down to emotional clearing, it's just as simple as, if you feel something, feel it. There is such thing as bypassing, which is spiritual bypassing and emotional bypassing. Those are the two that I'm going to touch on. And bypassing is essentially flipping the script, completely diverting your attention away from whatever is wants your focus and shifting it completely into another direction without properly processing it. And we live in a society that will bypass. It you know and bypassing, there's a time and a place to feel something and to look at it, and then to just start to not dwell in it, and to start shifting the focus in another direction. So part of this process is to not sit, what I call sit in the shadow too long. So like, if you're feeling something, feel it and let it out, but then move on from it as well in a healthy amount of time. And whatever that healthy amount of time is for you, it's solely for the individual. A good process for emotional release is journaling. Journaling is a big one. Really diving into why something happened. If you're feeling some sort of pain from a trauma, things like that, the idea is to dive into it, is to just talk to it, talk to the emotion like it's an individual. Because when it comes down to energy in all forms, spiritual, physical, and emotional, just energy in general, we can have a conversation with it. We can start to really dive into it by just simply acknowledging that it exists. That's the first thing. That's what illumination is. When you shed light on something, you're basically shining truth on it. And so when you're feeling sad, or you're feeling heartache, or you're feeling depression, or you're reliving a trauma, by simply acknowledging that it exists, you immediately take about 90% of the power out of it. Then the rest is about asking what it is trying to show you when it comes down to Let's talk about unfavorable emotions here. What are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to show me? What are you trying to tell me? Because if we look at our emotions like a voice, which is interesting because, I growing up with a mental health diagnoses, talking to an aspect of myself, and this aspect talking back, if I were to explain this to someone, could come across as, psychosis, hallucinations, so on and so forth. But I found this form of processing is actually really beneficial and really helpful, is to just sit back and to channel the emotion and to talk to it and have a conversation. What are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to show me? Why are you here? What do you need? I like to think of our unfavorable emotions a lot like a hungry child that's just coming up and saying, because what will happen is if a kid comes up to you and he says, I'm hungry, and you keep denying him, and he keeps coming back saying, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, and you just don't look at him and you basically bypass. So if we look at the emotion like a child, and you bypassing is not paying attention to the child wants its needs met and is going to keep speaking up louder and louder and getting more and more aggravated, and is going to start kicking and screaming until you give it what it wants. And so the idea of emotional clearing is that when that child, that emotion comes up and starts talking to you, you immediately acknowledge it and you ask what it is, what it wants, and if it's really getting out of hand, asking for it to speak to you in a different voice. That's been a big thing, is that sometimes these emotions will come up into play that are I'm used to feeling them very deep and very heavy, and I recognize that I'm at a phase of my development where it can't talk to me no longer like that. The drama behind it, the bullcrap behind it, the catastrophizing, the maximization of the emotion doesn't belong in my existence today. So I ask for it to talk to me in a kinder, softer, more gentle voice, and with acknowledging that, it'll end up getting better. So a lot of this happens through journaling for me. Meditation is key too, because once I silence the mind and I get into a heart-centered spot and can really be open to receiving the messages, that's when I get a clear channel of communication with the emotion. And especially with journaling too, there's something with the art of journaling, with writing down on a piece of paper, that's very therapeutic. Because I get to a point where it's almost like automatic writing, where the mind kind of steps out and the hand takes over, and that's my intuition really telling me the truth of what's going on. And what I'll do is I then can reflect back and read it and really process what's going on. Another really, really solid way of being able to clear an emotion is by just talking to someone, finding someone to hold space for you, in whatever form or fashion that may be. Because sometimes when I have trusted people that know me well enough, I will tell them something and they'll end up giving me a whole nother perspective on what's going on that really helps me to understand the emotion from multiple angles and be able to clear it properly. But once again, the idea is not to dive too deep into the emotion to the point where you're just suffocated by it, but enough to acknowledge it, to process it, and then to let it go and just let it come to the surface. Especially during times of full moon releases and things are going to come up that they're not going to feel nice. But the idea of this ascension process in clearing your channels and clearing your way isn't to feel nice all the time. We go through that crap because we clear out and we start to invite in new energy and we feel better. And so, if you're new to this ascension process and you're thinking that it's all puppy farts, rainbows, and sunshine, I hate to tell you, it isn't. There's a big part of it that is puppy farts, rainbows, and sunshine, but a lot of this is diving deep into things that you don't want to see or haven't seen before and illuminating those aspects and then going, wow, I didn't know I do that. And then being able to correct that pattern of behavior or being able to correct your old way of living, especially when you start to notice that, there's these patterns that exist within you. And that you want to start to break those patterns, you almost have to start switching to the complete opposite of what you were doing before. I like to say, an object in motion will stay in motion unless acted on by an unbalanced force. And so what we have to do is we have to start to shift that emotion into another direction. So if it's a negative emotion, switch it to a positive. And what happens is as soon as you start that motion, what will happen is you're going to find that sweet spot. Sometimes if you're switching to a positive emotion and it gets a little too positive and then you're bypassing things, you're not looking at things, you start to swing it back. And it's about this balance point of finding that frequency that works for you. Everyone's different. And a lot of this is just seeking that balance point. So when it comes down to emotional clearing, the best way to emotionally clear is by just feeling what you're feeling and letting it out, and then moving on from it. And knowing that emotions are a part of the human experience and we're going to feel them. We live in a society now that likes to drown out our emotions, distract, whether it be through TV, through sex, through drugs, through alcohol, through medications, whatever it may be. There's a healthy time to distract and a healthy time to reflect as well. And so the idea is, as for me, especially someone who's a recovering drug addict, who spent a majority of his life on medications and under the influence of something, is now not to no longer feel, but how to feel properly, which is to feel what it really is, honor it for what it really is, don't downplay it, don't maximize it, let it out, and then move on. Especially coming from the standpoint of making comparisons. The worst thing you can do, in my opinion and in my idea, is that if you're feeling something, starting to say, oh, I shouldn't feel this way because there's someone else out there that has it so much worse, or there's someone out there who has it, whatever, starting to make the comparisons. The idea is to honor what you are feeling at that moment. And if you feel like you need to be in more gratitude or you shouldn't be feeling that way, feel it and then start taking action steps towards correcting that. Okay, well, if I'm feeling like, I'm being a complainer, okay, for instance, I feel like I'm being a complainer and there's people out there who have it so much worse. Well, what can I do on a day-to-day basis to live in a higher state of gratitude? And then start to ask yourself this, and then just be open to receiving the messages from the universe or your own intuitive knowing of how to correct that behavior. So if you're someone who's always in negative self-reflection, who's always doubting, okay, well then what can I do to start being grateful for the little things I have? And then literally just affirmations throughout the day. You can say to yourself, I'm very grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. Because what happens is we have a magic magnifying mind that will zoom in on one aspect and we tend to disregard what's going on. So if we look at our emotional life and our life in general as a mosaic, okay, and we see that it is made up of so many parts. If we zoom in on the darkness in that one piece, all we're going to see is that. And what we have to do is learn to zoom out and to see the whole picture for what it is and recognize that everything that exists, all energies, all thought forms, all emotions in a healthy balance on this painting is what creates the piece of art. And so learning when to zoom in and to maximize on that piece if you want to correct it, but then to zoom out and recognize that it is just a sum, it's one part that creates the sum of all parts in order to create the beautiful masterpiece that is you. So guys, much love and respect to everybody out in the Webiverse. That's all I got right now for emotional clearing. Check back tomorrow for I'm going to talk about physical clearing next, and then we'll do energetic clearing, which is going to be a lot longer of a process. So guys, if you haven't already, please click subscribe. Check out the links in the description box, and I will see you on the other side. Namaste.